I'd like to call your attention to an article by one of our colleagues, Jim Brandon, on the projectmanagement.com website. It's titled, "Is There Widespread Consensus? An Appeal for Second Public Exposure Draft." We all know that there has been no public exposure draft since very early in 2020, yet the PMI is forging ahead to release an unvetted and validated by the wider audience of project managers PMBOK guide. Jim says, "I believe the drafting committee who wrote the 7th edition update to the standard for the project management made a good faith effort to bring the standard in line with their vision of the state of the profession. They obviously worked very hard and dedicated themselves to completing the document within the constraints of a volunteer team working in a virtual environment with sensitivity to schedule. PMI Standards has always prided itself on developing consensus-based standards and guides that promote the practice of project management. To accomplish this, standards development committees seek open participation and multiple rounds of input. It is only through a robust effort to elicit and incorporate feedback can a true consensus view be obtained. Unfortunately, in my professional opinion, having contributed to the public exposure drafts of the 3rd, 5th, and 7th editions, the document as it stands today does not reflect a consensus of the reviewers. The document suffers from flaws in the process of content development more than from the efforts of the drafting committee. This post respectfully requests the Standards Consensus Committee in its June meeting to vote against approving the document as an ANSI standard for the following 5 reasons. Reason 1, the content does not reflect the special aspects of project management as a subset of general organizational management. The heart of the document focuses on 12 principles which can apply to any business without regards for the demands of projects producing changes in those organizations. There is no basis for those 12 principles identified, no discussion of market studies or literature reviews or even a bibliography or an example of a study focused on principles of PM practice. There is no justification made for defining these 12 principles as the project delivery principles. A Google search of PM principles yielded some surprising findings. From 15 sources, not counting PMI, 29 principles were identified that do not correlate to the 12 principles in the standard. 2 observations. First, of the 12 principles in the standard, 2 did not occur a single time in those 15 sources. 1. Recognize and respond to systems interactions. 2. Build quality into processes and results. Second, 5 of the 12 principles in the standard were mentioned between 1 and 5 times out of 15 sources. The above 2 observations indicate to me that the 12 principles are not universally recognized. That is, there is a lack of consensus in a majority of the digitally available resources for the PMI membership. Reason 2. The content does not include a single reference to the PM body of knowledge, the life cycle, temporary nature of projects, and conflates PM vocabulary into most meaningless and confusing discussions. For example, repeated use the phrase projects, programs, and portfolios as if they are equivalent value delivery systems. In my opinion, only projects deliver value, while programs and portfolios manage projects to magnify the coordinated value of multiple projects. Reason 3. Approximately 500 reviewers submitted over 5,000 comments on 1,492 lines, that is 3.35 comments per line. As to the process of establishing consensus, the feedback I received from my 87 suggestions for improvements or clarifications of content resulted in 77, that is 89%, accepted with modification, which is actually a misnomer because the vast majority received this standard reply, our justification. Several comments were received for this segment of content. In response, we have eliminated the sentence. That is not accepted and modifying. That is rejecting suggestions for improvement or clarification. Only one of my 77 comments was implemented, and my comment pointed out that the original statement was not true, so it was rewritten. Of the 87 responses to my input, I appealed 56 because I objected to the elimination of content that needed clarification or simple additions to make it appropriate to the PM environment. The response to my appeals was shocking to me. Since the disputed text was removed from the document, the appeal is rejected. Why cannot a person appeal for the reinstatement of content that was originally deemed worthy of inclusion to be improved rather than omitted? Reason 4. Bottom line of my participation. My original review covered 211 of 1,492 lines. Based on the identified text tied to the eliminated sentence, approximately 20% of the text was eliminated, including a discussion of the roles and responsibilities of the key project participants, and only about 10% was rewritten, including a new figure without public exposure. If one extrapolates the number of appeals based on my experience, the magnitude of objections does not indicate consensus because of the significantly changed document. Reason 5. The deletions and unpublished replacements constitute a significant change to the public exposure draft, a document only the drafting committee has seen. Without a broader review by the larger project management community for additional feedback, I do not believe PMI can claim the document has a consensus of the membership or profession. Changes of this magnitude warrant a full public exposure of the revised draft to support any valid claim there is broad consensus of the content for the content of the new document. Thus, I feel the document needs a second public exposure to establish that the new standard has the consensus of the members who have devoted so much time, so much effort to help the drafting committee reach its goals of a current standard that will serve the profession for the foreseeable future. I welcome other views as to whether the proposed draft standard for project management 7th edition as it now stands is a true consensus-based standard and its content reflects the PM context. Jim Brandon, MBA, PMP. Well, Jim, thank you for taking the time to put things in a very coherent fashion. I decided to bring this to the surface of other project managers who may have heard other videos or audios that I've put out and really do not understand what all the fuss is about. This is very articulate and very well put together. Now, in addition to that, you see some other comments that I have posted on the channel are reflected here, such as from Dave. Dave says, I fully concur with your assessment. The 7th edition update for the standard for project management is not ready for publication as an ANSI standard. It must go through a full second exposure draft. Of course, it still has not. The PMI has still gone ahead refusing to put out a second public exposure draft. And what I've said in the past is this is not indicative of servant leadership. This is dictatorship. Sergio Luis Conti says, I was part 2. I am in agreement with you, and I've expressed this to all people which are inside the standards committee. My opinion is the aim to maintain the business. The PMI is destroying the business where the word business is not used in a prerogative way, I believe he meant to say. So, my friends, with that said, you do understand that this review of the PMBOK Guide 7th edition is not complete. This is not a complete review because they have refused to share what exists with a wider audience. It has been shrouded in mystery, and they have refused to share it with us. You keep reading down, you'll see many other comments, many other pieces of information, people who are equally frustrated and not happy with the PMI. Take a look at all the information here. This is from George. George has commented on videos in the past, and George says, I am passionate about standards, been part of every PMBOK published this century and of ISO standards since the activity started as well. Moreover, for us, the PMI members that are supposed to be driving what our association does, the PMBOK Guide is the cornerstone of everything PMI. After all, we are in PMI and not in another association because we believe in a certain approach to project management. This is a very good comment here. We need to uphold what we believe in, you see, and George says this is why I cannot accept a standard and an associated guide that only minimally meets ANSI standards and disregards the spirit of PMBOK as a consensus of practitioners about what represents good practice in most projects most of the time. Very good article, and you definitely should visit this page and read what our esteemed colleagues have said. PMI obviously do not care. There has been no addressing of this topic, and if you take a look at the dates that this was published, this was May. So since May till now, they have still refused to come out with a second exposure. Why? I think it's captured very well here. The key word, let's look for it. Sergio says, my opinion is with the aim to maintain the business. PMI is destroying the business. Very well said. So, in order to maintain the business, they have come out with random, in my opinion, lackluster, not substantial, not substantiated babble. Jim said it well. Everything he said is right on point, and this, my friends, is to alert you to the fact that when the 7th edition does eventually come out, I want you to remember that this has not gone through the typical review process. This is a small section of the populace that is affiliated with the PMI, putting some random thoughts together, putting things that they in their own little isolated bubble think project managers should do, putting that together and throwing it to the rest of the audience, tossing it across the wall. If you truly believe the profession and you're passionate about the profession, you will not look at the 7th edition as being worth the paper that it's written on. Jim said it well. 12 random principles that would fit any business. Random delivery principles that you conjured out of thin air as though to compete with the Agile Manifesto or I don't know what. It seems as though to stay afloat and relevant in the business, some random principles have been conjured and thrown together. We refuse. And when the 7th edition comes out, we can definitely vote with our opinions on Amazon when it does come out. If you are listening to this after it is released, I want you to go to Amazon, voice your opinion. I want you to go to any social media board, voice your opinion, because that is the only way to generate change. When the people involved at the heart of the movement reject the insult that has been thrown at them that is when the volume of our voices will be very evident. Once again, thanks to Jim and Dave and Sergio and Thomas and George, who have shared the information on this page, Stefan and everyone else. There's a lot more information you can glean from here. But the summary is, it's very, very sad that the PMI that has stood for project management and understanding stakeholder engagement and management has failed miserably. In fact, the sound of their failure is so deafening, it can be heard millions of miles away.